If you're looking to buy an iPhone in 2024, you have 8 different models to choose from, and watching a review video on each individual phone is just far too time consuming. So in this video, we're going to break down every iPhone currently sold by Apple. We're going to discuss the good and the bad, which ones you should just outright avoid, how long each of them will last, and of course, the best phone to buy in 2024 based on multiple different categories. Okay, so we're going to break this down into categories. So we're going to start with design and build quality because every iPhone currently sold by Apple has a similar full screen design aside from the iPhone SE, which still has the home button and those extra large bezels on the top and the bottom. Now the iPhone 13, the iPhone 14s, and the iPhone 15s all use an aluminum frame with a glass back. Now the 15 and the 15 Plus use what Apple calls a color infused glass back. So it's kind of like this matte feeling, which is very similar to the Pros. Now the 15 Pro and Pro Max are the first iPhones with a titanium frame. So in theory, they should be tougher and more resistant with drops as compared to all the other iPhones. The iPhone SE and the iPhone 13 are the only ones with a physical SIM tray, as Apple moved to eSIM only starting with the iPhone 14 series. And all of these iPhones, except for the iPhone 15 series, charge with the Lightning cable. So the iPhone 15 series charge up using USB-C. So it's much more convenient to have just one cable around the house to charge everything. Now the front glass of every iPhone except for the iPhone SE is made by Corning and is dubbed the Ceramic Shield. So Apple claims that Ceramic Shield is tougher than any other smartphone glass on the market and offers 4 times better drop protection than previous iPhones. So I've noticed a difference from older phones to the newer phones, but you can still get scratches on them. Just know that it's going to be tougher on all these models as compared to the SE. Now also, all of these phones are IP68 water and dust resistant, except for the SE once again, which is IP67 rated. Now, as far as the size and the weight goes, the iPhone SE has a 4.7-inch display and it weighs 148 grams, whereas the iPhone 13, iPhone 14, iPhone 15, and iPhone 15 Pro all have the same 6.1-inch display, and you can see the corresponding weights above. Now, it is important to note that the iPhone 15 is also slightly taller than the 13 and the 14. And then for the big boys, the 14 Plus, 15 Plus, and the 15 Pro Max, these all have a 6.7-inch display. Now, it's important to note as well that the 15 Plus is slightly skinnier in width compared to the 14 Plus. And if you looked at those weight numbers, the 15 Pro Max stands out because it's 221 grams, which seems high, but it's actually the lightest Pro Max phone since the 12 Pro Max over 3 years ago. So if you have a 13 Pro Max or a 14 Pro Max, just know that the 15 Pro Max will feel noticeably lighter in the hand and especially in the pocket. It's the first time I've ever used a Pro Max phone and it didn't feel like an absolute brick in my pocket. And the titanium borders on the 15 Pro and Pro Max just make these phones feel the best overall out of any of these phones. So they do show fingerprints quite a bit. I mean, pretty much just as much as the stainless steel borders on the previous Pro and Pro Max, but these things feel awesome in the hand despite weighing a tad more than the non-Pro iPhones. Okay, so now let's get more specific with the displays because there are some major differences here that could make or break your decision. So the iPhone 13, iPhone 14, and the iPhone 15 series have the same Super Retina XDR OLED display. They all have a similar resolution with a 460 ppi and a 2 million to 1 contrast ratio. Now the 13 and the 14 have 800 nits of peak brightness and 1200 nits of peak brightness when watching HDR, whereas the iPhone 15 series, yes, including the regular 15 and 15 Plus, have a 1000 nit peak brightness, 1600 nits when watching HDR, and an astonishing 2000 nits of peak brightness when outdoors if you have auto brightness turned on. Meanwhile, the iPhone SE is the only one with an LCD display, and this has a 326 ppi with a 1400 to 1 contrast ratio, and it also has only 625 nits of peak brightness, and it's not an HDR display, so that's the max no matter what you're watching. But aside from the big difference in peak brightness, brightness, there's also a glaring difference here between the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 15, and that is the dynamic island. So previously, before the iPhone 15 series, the dynamic island was exclusive to the Pro models, the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. But with the iPhone 15 series, it is included on all of them, including the base model and the 15 Plus. Now, this makes seeing notifications and system alerts significantly easier to see and interact with, as they no longer are notifications. They're just animations. Like, you can see the weather, you can see, your alarm, you have Flighty to show your flight details when you're in other applications, or, just on the home screen. The dynamic island is just super useful. So if you've used it before, you understand how useful it is. If you haven't, you just have to use a phone with dynamic island to understand how useful it is. Another big difference with the displays is the refresh rate. So the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max are the only ones currently sold by Apple with the 120 Hz ProMotion display. Now, all other iPhones, including the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, are limited to just 60 Hz. So with the 120 Hz refresh rate, everything's just going to feel smoother. Animations look better. It just feels quicker when performing regular tasks on a daily basis. So this is another thing, you kind of just have to use it to understand how much better it is and how much better it feels than 60 Hertz displays. And that ProMotion 120 Hertz display also allows for the always on display, which shows you the time, it shows you notifications, it shows you widgets, all of that when you lock your device. So this is the 15 Pro Max, and when I lock my device, you can see that we have the always on display. So I have the wallpaper turned off, so it only shows a black screen here, and you can see it's only using 1 Hertz. That's the refresh rate right now, so it does not drain the battery, but it's very convenient to be able to see the time, your calendar, your widgets, all of that at a glance, and you can tap it on to be able to see, your regular lock screen. Whereas if I did that with the regular 15 here, of course, it's just a black screen, and you have to tap to see the time in your widgets. And this gets taken even further with standby mode, which is a new feature in iOS 17 that transforms your phone into kind of like a smart display or a smart home hub with several glanceable widgets that you can add. And this works on the regular iPhone models as well, but the screen goes off after a while, whereas the screen stays on with the 15 Pro and Pro Max thanks to the always on display. And then as for the speaker quality, all of these have stereo speakers and they all sound good except for the iPhone SE, but the iPhone 15 Pro and especially the Pro Max are going to get the loudest and also just sound the best, sound the most full out of any of the other iPhones. But there's really not a huge difference here amongst these, except for, again, with the SE, which is just not great at all. And then also on the 15 Pro, we have the action button on the side, whereas we've had a mute switch on every previous iPhone in history. So this is pretty cool, and you can change what the action button does in the settings here. So you can change it to activate the flashlight, focus modes, camera, all of that. So if I go ahead and press and hold on that, it's going to turn on or turn off my focus mode. You can tie it into shortcuts and all of that. So super useful, but it's not necessarily something I would base your purchasing decision solely on. Okay, so now that it looks like a rainbow on my desk, we can see all of the camera systems on all of the phones currently sold by Apple. So let's break these down. So first off, the iPhone 13, iPhone 14, and iPhone 14 Plus all have a dual 12 megapixel camera system with a main and an ultra wide lens. Now they have a 0.5x and a 1x optical zoom, and they can digital zoom up to 5x. They all have deep fusion, smart HDR4, portrait mode, and night mode, and they can shoot video up to 4K 60 in HDR, and they do also have cinematic mode. Now the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus have the photonic engine, which is basically Apple's computational photography technique that leads to better quality photos in low to mid lighting. So the 14 and the 14 Plus also have action mode, so that was the first time action mode debuted, and they also have cinematic mode in 4K HDR, whereas you can only do cinematic mode in 1080p on the 13. For the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, these look very similar to the camera setup on the 13 and the 14, but you can see that the lenses are a little bit bigger than they were previously, but we still have the same main and ultra wide lens on these two. However, the main lens on the 15 and 15 Plus is now 48 megapixels, whereas on the 13s and the 14s, it was just 12 megapixels for that main lens. So we now have 0.5x, 1x, and 2x optical zoom on the 15 and 15 Plus with digital zoom up to 10x. We also have Deep Fusion Smart HDR5 instead of Smart HDR4. We have next generation portraits with focus and depth control and just better quality photos in general with HEIF Max, which allows you to take full advantage of 48 megapixels. And it's also important to note that the 15 and the 15 Plus shoot photos by default at 24 megapixels, which is double that of the 13 and 14 series. And then moving on to the 15 Pro, we have a triple camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide lens, and a 12 megapixel telephoto lens. Now this has second generation sensor shift optic image stabilization, which leads to much better stabilization, not just for photos, but also for video. We have 0.5x, 1x, 2x, and 3x optical zoom with digital zoom up to 15x. You're able to shoot night mode portraits. You have my favorite type of photography, macro photography, thanks to the ultra wide lens and autofocus. And you can also shoot in Pro RAW format, which allows you to shoot photos in RAW, where you can edit and manipulate the photo a lot more than you can on non-Pro RAW images. And for video, you can shoot ProRes video up to 4K 60 with external recording. So you can record to like an external SSD or a thumb drive or anything like that. And you also have the ability to shoot in log, which is for professionals. And there's also things like macro video recording, including slow-mo and time-lapse. And then the iPhone 15 Pro Max has everything that the 15 Pro has, except for the fact that the telephoto lens has the all-new tetraprism design, which leads to better zoom range, better OIS, and better autofocus. So it's just going to be a better camera system overall when it comes to telephoto shots. And I've noticed that the 5x optical zoom leads to significantly better portrait shots, even compared to the 15 Pro, which can only do portrait shots at 3x. And the digital zoom on the 15 Pro Max can go up to 25x. So you can zoom in quite a bit on the 15 Pro Max. And this does also have better OIS, especially in videos. And I showed this in my previous 15 Pro versus 15 Pro Max comparison video. And then over here, I didn't forget about it. The iPhone SE has a single 12 megapixel camera with 1x optical zoom, Deep Fusion, Smart HDR4, and portrait mode. And it can shoot video in 4K 60, but no HDR or any of the other modes on the 13, 14, or 15. So of course, if you care about image and video quality, that's like one of your top two things you're looking to buy an iPhone for, you can just instantly eliminate the iPhone SE. And then for the front-facing cameras, you're not really going to see a huge difference in the 13 through the 15, but the best quality, of course, will be on the 15 series, mainly thanks to Smart HDR5, which is built in also to the front-facing camera. Okay, so now let's talk about the battery life, because this is another major area that you need to focus on when choosing the right iPhone in 2024. And you might just think that the Pro Max is going to get the best battery life and you can just, go on from there, but you would be wrong. The Pro Max does not get the best battery life, despite Apple saying that it does. So let's lay out the specs that Apple puts out for video streaming playback, which I feel like is the most relatable and the thing that you guys would actually do, as opposed to 90 hours straight of audio playback or, video playback just in the Photos app. So anyways, the iPhone SE, Apple rates that for video streaming playback of up to 10 hours. The 13, 15 hours, 14, 16 hours, the 14 Plus, 20 hours, the 15, also 16 hours, 15 Plus, also 20 hours, 15 Pro, 20 hours, and the 15 Pro Max, 25 hours. So Apple says that the 15 Pro Max will last 5 hours longer. That is a big claim there over the 15 Pro or the 15 Plus when watching streaming playbacks like YouTube videos. However, once again, in my testing, it shows a different story, because the 15 Plus has outperformed the 15 Pro Max on a daily basis by at least an hour, sometimes over 2 hours. And that's just been from my personal testing over the past couple of months. And also almost every test here on YouTube shows the same thing. It shows the 15 Plus lasting longer than the 15 Pro Max. So if you're trying to choose between the regular 13, the regular 14, and the regular 15, there's really not enough of a difference in day-to-day usage to choose one over the other just based on battery life. You really start to see the difference with the 14 and the 15 Plus and also the 15 Pro Max. These are going to be, the best battery life of all of these in my opinion. Now the 15 Pro, Apple rates that for the same as the 14 Plus, but I just have not seen that. I've not seen that at all, and it rates it for the same as the 15 Plus as well. But I think that the 15 Pro gets worse battery life than both the Plus models. And as you already likely know, avoid the iPhone SE if you want all-day battery life because you likely just will not get it there. Now, when it comes to the performance, this is another interesting area because this is something that used to play a major role in which iPhone to choose, but nowadays, I wouldn't really put a lot of weight into the performance of these phones because they all perform well. So let's lay out the specs first and then we'll talk more about that. So the iPhone SE, the iPhone 13, and the iPhone 14 all have the same A15 Bionic chip with a 5-core GPU, except for the SE, which has a 4-core and a 16-core neural engine. Now, the iPhone SE and the iPhone 13 have 4 gigabytes of RAM, whereas the iPhone 14 has 6 gigabytes of RAM. Now, as far as the 15 and the 15 Plus, those have the A16 Bionic chip with also 6 gigabytes of RAM. And then when it comes to the 15 Pro and Pro Max, those have the all-new A17 Pro chip with a 6-core GPU, 16-core neural engine, and 8 gigabytes of RAM. So nearly double the RAM of the SE, and the 13 actually is double the RAM. So it's going to be a big difference if you go from like a 13 to a 15 Pro. Now, after using all these phones extensively, I can wholeheartedly say that the performance on the 13, the 14, and the 15 is very similar. When doing basic tasks like web browsing, social media browsing, editing photos, watching YouTube videos, whatever it is that you're doing, all these phones right here are going to be very, very similar in terms of day-to-day usage. Now, you will see a small advantage on the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus because Apple upgraded, the chip to the A16 chip and also has more RAM than, say, the iPhone 13, but it's probably not something you're going to notice on a daily basis. You might notice it like once a week. However, with the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, you will see quite the difference in performance thanks to the A17 Pro chip and the record 8 gigabytes of RAM. And when I say quite the difference, I mean that you're going to see apps staying open longer in the background. They're going to stay open like forever. Like sometimes I go to sleep with something loaded up and then I wake up and I pick back up where I left off the previous night. Like the app is still open in the exact spot that I was in. It doesn't have to reload. So that is nice. I've only really ever seen that with the 15 Pro series. And gaming is also the smoothest it's ever been thanks to the hardware accelerated ray tracing, and that's just on the 15 Pro and Pro Max. Also, editing and saving photos and video edits, all of that kind of stuff is super fast. And plus, the 120 hertz refresh rate just makes everything on the screen just feel faster. Even if it's not actually faster, it feels faster because the refresh rate is double that of any other iPhone here. Now, with that being said, most people don't need the power of the 15 Pro and Pro Max. It offers more power than anybody your average consumer is actually going to use. So I would say that the best phone in this category for most people would be the iPhone 15. So again, don't base your decision solely off of performance. They're all solid. Even the SE is honestly solid in terms of performance, but I think the 15 takes the cake here because it does have the upgraded A16 Bionic chip over the A15 like all the previous ones. Okay, so now let's talk about connectivity because this is another area that many people overlook when choosing an iPhone these days, because just because we have 5G on all these phones doesn't mean that they're all treated equally. Some of them are a little bit different. Like for example, the iPhone SE only has sub-6 5G, whereas all the other phones here have millimeter wave, aka much faster 5G speeds. Now the iPhone 14s and the iPhone 15 series have Bluetooth 5.3, while the iPhone 13 and the SE only have Bluetooth 5.0. And this is something to keep in mind if you have multiple devices connected to your phone at any given point, like an Apple Watch, AirPods. You're going to be able to connect more if you have Bluetooth 5.3, and also the range is higher with Bluetooth Bluetooth 5.3 compared to 5.0. And the iPhone 15 series are also the only ones here with Apple's second generation ultra wideband chip, which means improved speeds and improved range for the Find My application, and also for things like spatial awareness, and most importantly, the awesome precision finding feature to find your friends as if they were an AirTag. Now the 15 Pro and Pro Max also have precision dual frequency GPS, which was first introduced with the 14 Pros, and this just means that it can receive signals from two different frequencies for more accurate and more reliable location tracking, especially in big cities. And the 15 Pro and Pro Max are also the only ones here with Wi-Fi 6E and Thread built in, which are both excellent for future proofing. And when it comes to physical connectivity, the 15 series are the only ones here with USB-C, but the 15 Pros allow for ultra fast data transfer speeds via USB 3, but that's only if you use a Thunderbolt cord. If you just use a regular USB-C cord, you're going to get the same USB 2 speeds as every other iPhone here. And now let's talk about the pricing before we get to which one to buy. So the iPhone SE is going to start at $429, and that is just for 64 gigabytes, which I would highly recommend against. The iPhone 13 starts at $599. The iPhone 14 and 14 Plus start at $699 and $799 respectively. The 15 and the 15 Plus start at $829 and $929 respectively, and you can subtract $30 if you activate with a carrier. And the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max start at $999 and $1099 respectively. And keep in mind that the 15 Pro Max starts at 256 gigabytes of storage, whereas all the others except for the SE start at 128. Okay, so now let's break down which iPhone you should buy in 2024. And let's right away get rid of the SE. Let's get this out of the way, because the only reason to buy this is if you literally do not have an extra $100 to $200 in your budget, or if you just have to have a home button. Like if you for some reason need a home button, obviously this is the only one to choose. But other than those two reasons, the value that you get from this phone is just simply not there. There's really no value that you get by spending over $400, close to $500 on the iPhone SE in 2024. So I would not recommend this to most people. But for the others that are still remaining, let me break it down like this. So if you care about battery life the most, I would look at the 14 Plus and the 15 Plus. I would choose between these two, of course, depending on what other factors you take into account. I would say that the 15 Plus is going to be the better value out of these two, because it does offer similar battery life, but you get that 48 megapixel camera, dynamic island, and all the other great features. Now, if you care about camera quality the most, with battery life as a close second, like the close second thing that you care about the most, the 15 Pro Max is going to be the one for you, as long as you can stretch that budget out to fit it. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't need all the fancy features, and you maybe need a phone for your child, I would say that the iPhone 13 is going to be the best for those people. So if you don't need 48 megapixel camera, if you don't need the dynamic island, if you don't need the best battery life, or again, if you need a phone for your child, if they're getting good grades and you want to reward them with an iPhone, I would look at the iPhone 13, especially over the iPhone SE. Again, you're just not getting as good a value with the SE as you are with the 13. Now, if you want the best overall bang for your buck out of any of these, I would say that's going to go to the iPhone 15. This thing, you're getting everything. I mean, you get the same display pretty much as the 15 Pro and Pro Max, because you have the same peak brightness, you have the same amazing camera quality, you have the same dynamic island. You just get a lot of features packed into a base model phone that we've really never seen before from Apple. Of course, the only thing you're missing is the ProMotion display and the always on display, but that's something that most people can live with if you've never had one before. So best bang for your buck, definitely the iPhone 15. And if you want the best mix of features and cost, but don't necessarily care about having the best camera quality or best battery life, I would say that the iPhone 14 is a fine choice. I don't think it's quite as compelling as the iPhone 13 is, given the price. So I would say that if you care more about bang for your buck, the iPhone 13 offers more bang for the buck than the iPhone 14 does. Basically because they're very similar overall. I mean, they have the same chipset inside, they have the same camera pretty much, they have the same notch right here on the front. So the 13 and 14 are very similar. So if you care more about just getting a great value, go for the iPhone 13, unless you just really like the purple color, one of the colors that the 14 comes in. And you might have noticed that I did not mention the 15 Pro here at all. And the reason for that is not because it's a bad phone. It's not because it's a bad choice, but it's just because it's kind of in no man's land here, because you get so much value with the regular 15 and also with the 15 Pro Max, thanks to the extra camera and the good battery life. The 15 Pro is just kind of in no man's land. So yeah, I mean, this is only good really for those who like all of the, features on the Pro Max, but it's just simply too big. Really, the only people I can see getting the 15 Pro are people who want the Pro Max, but it's just too big for them. That's really the only ones I would recommend the 15 Pro to. If you can stand the weight and the feel of the 15 Pro Max, I would go for that over the regular 15 Pro. Again, mainly thanks to the tetraprism design and also the better battery life. And plus, when you take into account the value of these phones, you have to look at how long a phone will last in terms of software updates. So again, that was also baked into my decision to say that the iPhone 15 is the best overall phone to buy in 2024, because it's going to last the longest. It not only has all those features, but it's also going to last the longest in terms of software updates. Like, keep in mind, the iPhone 13 came out in 2021 and the iPhone 14 came out in 2022, but both have the A15 Bionic chip. Apple usually kills off phones based on the processor inside, not necessarily the model or the year that it came out. So in theory, the iPhone 15 with the A16 chip is likely to last at least 2 years longer than the iPhone 13 or the iPhone 14. That is just something to keep in mind here. So if I had to rank these phones on which ones I think are best for most people in 2024, I would say iPhone 15 is in first place, iPhone 15 Pro Max in second place, iPhone 13 in third place, iPhone 15 Plus in fourth place, iPhone 15 Pro in fifth place, iPhone 14 Plus in sixth, iPhone 14 in 7th, and iPhone SE in last. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to get your hands on any of the wallpapers that you've seen throughout this video, those will be linked down in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate if you give it a thumbs up. Also, make sure to subscribe for more iPhone reviews just like this. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.